This is Test Case Scenario with me, your host, Jason Baum. This podcast is the definitive hub for knowledge and stories in the software testing and development communities. If you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button and let's dive straight into the episode.
Hey everyone, welcome to Test Case Scenario. Today you'll notice that the usual smooth voice that you hear from Jason Baum is replaced by my more dulcet voice from Marcus Merrill. Unfortunately, Jason's out sick this week, so we had to improvise. We drew straws, and it's me. Lucky you. Joining me happily is Nikolai Advoladkin, as usual, and today we are joined by special guest Kurt Dusek, who is here from Appdome. First of all, before we introduce Kurt, would you just say this is more dulcet than smooth? Can you have dulcet and smooth be in the same voice? Or is it that Jason is smooth and that I am dulcet? Or do I have it all wrong? Maybe I'm not objective about this.
When you say dulcet, I think of like a xylophone. It's like a tender sound, like a lullaby.
Interesting. I think
Not bad.
I think I may have it reversed. At any rate, I'm going to leave a little bit of a pause at the end in case we decide to cut this out. So, Kurt, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Marcus. My name is Kurt Dusek. I'm a senior product manager at Appdome. We'll get into the details of Appdome over the course of our conversation today, but my background is really in, application development, software development, delivering software, delivering applications. And at Appdome, I'm focusing on how to deliver applications on mobile that have security built in and integrated as part of the binary and part of the application. So we'll be talking about how all that works today.
Great. So I mean that's a great. So specializing in mobile, right? And you take an app that's essentially already built, and then you harden it. You put a shield around it or something like that. Or I think you actually had a different way of putting that.
Yeah. So typically the way it works is, at least the Appdome product, is that it's specifically for mobile applications. So if you're a mobile application developer, regardless of what platform you're deploying to, or the programming language you're writing in, or the framework you're using to build your app, basically what you would do is take the app that you would normally deploy out to an app store or deliver to your users and run that through the Appdome platform. And what that allows us to do is build those protections directly into the binary. We used to call it fusing, but now we just say, hey, this is a build tool. I think that's a term more developers and more technical folk understand. This is basically a secondary build step that will add those protections directly into the application.
Right. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I've seen the demo, but I believe one of my favorite features when I think I'm describing this accurately, is that you deploy the app to production or somewhere. And then not only do you get an app that is hardened against threats, but also traces the origin and all of the activity that is attempting to threaten your application. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So we have the core, Appdome protections product, and then we also have what we call ThreatScope. And ThreatScope is a threat detection and, more importantly, a response tool for mobile apps. So, generally speaking, you release an application out there and it's out in the wild, and you may not have any idea of who's using it, where it's being deployed. You're assuming that, hey, if we're not seeing any malicious activity in the servers or in the backend, everything's great and we're doing well. But what ThreatScope does is it shows you, actually, are things as good as you expect them to be? And you can have the ability to drill down, by geographic region, by platform, by version of your application, version of your operating system, to really see what threats are being applied to your application in real time. And so this gives you a visibility that typically, especially with mobile, which is a lot of times underserved, this gives you visibility into what's actually taking place in your app. What are people using your app for? You have the common use cases, the happy path, the ideal, scenario and use cases. And then you have, what I call malicious use cases, where people are working hard to compromise your app, to undermine its security, to breach your, application backends. And so ThreatScope gives you that visibility into, what's happening outside of what you expect your users to do. And it's a great visualization tool that adds a lot of information into how you can really tighten and enhance your security posture, And so without that visibility, you're kind of at this guessing game of this is what we think is important. This is what we think the risks are. But if that doesn't really map to the reality of what's going on, then it's not really a beneficial or valuable security protection.
Yeah, I remember the big aha moment for me was seeing a world map that said like, this particular app that is a real customer user app that's out there in the world, in the wild. There is a threat that has come from like Brazil. There's a man in the middle attempt at using Android version XY on a Samsung some other device, and just sort of monitoring that traffic and making you kind of think, oh well, if I'm not using Appdome, am I sure I'm protected against like all of those different variables, or am I just trying to generally protect one thing? It was a really big aha moment for me, and one of the reasons
Yeah.
why I really thought Appdome was a special kind of product that we wanted to get on the podcast.
Yeah, it is. Again, if you're, you have to start somewhere when it comes to security. You don't always know what the right thing to do is. So, using the house analogy, okay, we make sure that our front door is locked and the side window is locked, but we may have forgotten that, oh, you know what, the garage door is unlocked. And if somebody makes an entry in there, weren't even thinking about that. And it's the same thing with app security, right? We can think of, hey, let's stand up a big firewall. Let's do the code analysis. Let's do these things on our side. But, your attackers, they're clever. They're creative. They're thinking of all sorts of different, vectors and mechanisms and exploits of things, how to breach these systems, especially if we're talking about valued, applications that drive value, that have either currency or points or microtransactions or user data that's stored on the device. Those are all things that are valuable, and not only are they valuable to the business owner, the stakeholders in the app, they're valuable to malicious actors, right? If you aggregate enough data, if you can extract and exfiltrate enough personal information, that opens up a vector potentially even in another system. We've seen with something like SolarWinds, the vector for that was via mobile. So being able to compromise a big, broad system like that by gleaning, all these malicious actors, they're looking for clues. And so if they can look at, hey, this is how the API works on mobile, and it's different than how it works, on web, well, that's interesting, and so that's a clue that a malicious actor is going to use to put together this puzzle to say, okay, how are we going to make our move here? How are we going to make our attack? So having that visibility into, from the mobile perspective, ensuring that that is guarded and protected in the right way, and knowing, what's the biggest risk, what's the biggest, the biggest challenge and risk to our application, and then being able to shut that down proactively in basically a push button, as a push button event, that's going to put you in a much stronger position for securing your entire platform. Because again, the mobile app is typically the most exposed part of your infrastructure. And so that's where a lot of times, there's a leakage of data and other threats that are coming in on that vector.
Hey, Kurt, sorry, I have a number of questions based on everything you said.
Sure.
First, I wanted to take a quick step back because this is my first time hearing about Appdome, and I imagine many
Mm-hmm.
listeners as well. And there was one thing you mentioned that, well, I understand that it's about creating secure mobile apps. There are probably a number of ways to do that. And one thing you mentioned that wasn't clear to me. So a team develops an application, and you said you all basically build Appdome into the application. So how does that work? Is that code that a developer has to add to their mobile app and then produce a binary with Appdome inside of it?
No. So it's a very different approach, and it's a unique approach because it is mobile. And so, typically the way, software development works, you have people writing an app, and we compile the app. So there's the linker, there's creating the objects, there's all the components and steps that go into turning text code into an executable. And so within that, basically Appdome just adds on another step to say, before we create that binary, that final executable, let's add these protections. And so, on the far left of the process is going to be where you define what protections you want. So the easy example is root jailbreak. So I don't want my app to run on a rooted or a jailbroken device. I'm going to turn that protection on in the Appdome configuration. Then when it gets to the build process, we have all the code, we do all the security research, we understand what the implementation of that looks like. So jailbreak detection under iOS 15 is very different than jailbreak protection under, say, iOS 12, right? And again, that keeps going forever. Just as there's going to be new versions of iOS, there's going to be new ways to defeat the protections and new ways to detect things like that. And so that's where we say, okay, we know what this protection looks like. We have our um, mechanism for detecting and defending against that. And so then what we can do is then build those protections directly and as part of that compilation step. So from a developer standpoint, there's no code to write. There's no SDK that needs to be added to the repository. There's no implementation effort. From a developer's perspective, it's transparent. They're going to write the code that they want. They have their backlog and their tickets that they're working. But at the security, from a security standpoint, that's who's paying attention into what these protections are going to be. The idea here is that you can configure what protections that you want to live. And this is typically your CISO's wish list. I want to have jailbreak detection. I want to have, anti-malware. I want to have man in the middle protection. Then it goes from the things we want to, well, we have to turn that into tickets. We have to turn that into research. We have to task people. Maybe we don't have the right resources for that have an expertise in those types of protections. And so from an implementation standpoint, going from, hey, we need this type of protection to that actually living in the application can be months or longer. And so the idea with Appdome is that because it's seamless to the developers and it's part of the build process, it's something we can deliver in minutes. And so that's really the differentiator between how Appdome works and a lot of the other security products out there. A lot of security products are based on code level security, and rightfully so, right? The overwhelming majority of focus right now is on cloud and on, APIs and backends and databases and things like that. And the way you protect those is you put up a big firewall, you make sure that your dependencies are in check, you make sure that your access control is in play. And so that's great, that makes sense. But you have that luxury when, those resources are on-prem, or those resources are under your control. Hey, we own the cloud server. If we need to shut that down and upgrade it to a new version, we absolutely can do that. The mobile app is totally different, right? You're running on the user in user land, right? This is their device that hopefully is a device. It's hopefully not a virtualized instance of a phone. And, hopefully it's a person that's using this device, and hopefully it's not a bot, that's been replicated 1,000 times to try and do, automated pen testing. So because you have a very different context of mobile to cloud and desktop, it's a double-edged sword, because number one, it requires a different approach to security, but at the same time, you have a different approach to delivering the protection. Because you're sending out that binary to your users, then you can say, this is what needs to be in that binary. This is what is in that binary. And so that's where Appdome comes into play, is because what we're adding to that binary isn't just the protections. We're ensuring that, hey, is this runtime environment what we want it to be? Does this conform to the level that we expect? So again, that rooted example, right? We don't want our apps to run on a rooted device, or fundamentally, we want our apps to only run on physical devices. We don't want our app to run in a virtual machine where someone can manipulate the clock speed or look directly into memory, manipulate the file system, things like that. Those are the things that we're adding to say, look, if that condition is not being met or is being violated, then let's gracefully close the app and alert the user that says, hey, this doesn't conform with, our security posture. So, use a real device, or don't use a jailbroken device, or uninstall that malware, or get to a network that's more trustworthy. We can let the user know, whether, if they're if they're intentionally doing this and they're a malicious actor, we can let them know, we know what you're up to. We're detecting this as an event. And if they don't know, you have some people who added some application that may have a piece of malware on there that they may not even be aware of, then we can then inform them and say, look, there's something wrong with your device. Maybe it's worth kind of investigating this a little further, but for right now, we're not going to let you use your, this online banking app or your, whatever that application is that again is not being run in a safe environment.
So is it like a firewall for a mobile app where you configure networking rules, and based on networking rules, certain requests get in, other requests don't? And so for this mobile experience, there's a firewall, which is Appdome, that has rules. And based on the user's interactions or bots interactions, whatever, those rules trigger different application behavior.
No, so there's no, Appdome isn't in the middle of the app. So it's not looking at traffic, two-way traffic. It's not evaluating, it's not phoning home to say, oh, this is happening. Should we allow it? It's really the configuration or that security um, posture that you want built into the app. So we're not doing live checks on certain things. We do checks to say, hey, is someone sniffing the traffic? Is someone else sniffing the traffic here, right? Is there a proxy in between the endpoint and the firewall? We can do different detections like that. But our goal isn't to evaluate all the user actions and then report back and then approve or deny types of things. Where we do get into things like that is we have a product called Mobile Antibot, and it's basically a suite of the same protection. So if you say, hey, I'm really concerned about bots on my network or bots potentially using our application, Mobile Antibot is a collection of protections that we put together to say, hey, if we add, let's say, man in the middle protection, if we add real device verification, if we add uh, basically anti-overlay protection, and then finally the cherry on top, we do integrate with the firewall, say the customer's firewall, whether it's F5 or whatever they're using as a SIEM tool. We can then say, because these protections are in place and there's a firewall detection component, that's going to diffuse all the bots that are potentially out there. Because the first thing a bot's going to do is, well, bot has to run in a virtual machine, right? There's not a physical device there. Bot's going to need to run overlay. It's going to run a script of actions. It's going to potentially also modify the clock speed so it doesn't run in real time. It runs at 10x real time, right? And so these are all things. And then when the other component is that firewall, where it's like we're seeing a lot of traffic coming from a certain location, or we're seeing a lot of traffic that doesn't have the signature of a real user. So whether that's custom headers, whether that's certain cookie values, whether those things, we end up creating this kind of constellation of a protection that says, hey, we're looking at multiple different facets here. And because it only takes one thing to really trigger this as an alert, and so that's something we can look at and say, okay, we do want to kind of look at this in a different way. We do want to kind of connect to the end user's firewall to make sure that, hey, the traffic flowing through this endpoint is what we expect it to. But generally speaking, Appdome isn't doing like real time um, basically filtering or evaluation of traffic or actions. We build the protections in based on what the configuration should be, and then if that configuration gets violated, then we know something's not right here.
Cool, that makes sense.
Kurt, is there any like impact on performance when Appdome is running, or is it pretty much just in line? I mean,
Yeah, our goal was to really make it transparent. We are on I would say, the fifth generation of our product. And so, for us, it's very obvious. Everybody is accustomed to a certain mobile experience. You can buy a house basically on your mobile device pretty much now, right? And so we want things to be snappy and fast and responsive and immediate. And so we know that that translates to the security as well. And so, for us over the years, we iterated to ensure that there is no impact, to the end user. There is no impact to the development time and the development process. And so those optimizations are built in. So the checks that we're doing or those protections that we're doing, we have our security research identifies the patterns, the fingerprints, the evidence of that. And so when we, for example, on app init, if we're doing that check for a rooted device, that's a very simple check, right? We're looking to see, okay, are these indicators of a rooted device or a real device present? And assuming that's done, those are quick and easy logical checks. And so, okay, we know we're past that. And so because we're not doing any heavy computational load. We're not sniffing network traffic. We're not evaluating a lot of things in real time. There isn't any delay or lag on the user experience because, we know that we need to keep that high, because if we have a client who says we want to start using Appdome, we're going to deploy it in our next version. Great. If their users come back and say, hey, I updated to the new version of the app and now it's slow and it's laggy or it crashes a lot or it doesn't work very well, that's going to come back on us. And so then it creates this trade-off of, well, we have a lousy user experience, but we're very secure. But then we don't have any more users because nobody wants to use this slow app anymore. So that's where we understand that, look, we, again, transparency of the security is our goal. The only thing we want to expose to the user is letting them know that when that configuration has been violated, right? That's the only impact that we have, the Appdome protections have on the app itself.
Uh, taking a step back from Appdome, and maybe I'm curious about general like security threats and so on. What do you think? What are the top 3 mobile security threats that you all have seen that customers should be aware of?
Ooh, top 3. Tampering with apps is one thing that we see that I think a lot of developers and a lot of companies that produce mobile apps, they don't quite appreciate the idea of fraud in the sense of. So I'll tell you a story. This is from an actual customer. So a customer was producing a game that they released globally. So, this game is in all the local app stores, and so they said, globally, traffic looks good. There's one country where we see all of this. We see, the number of downloads looks good. The network traffic looks good. The user signups, all of the activity in the app in this one country looks great, with one key exception. All the monetization is basically zero. So we're seeing, 10,000 users and $0 from, ad spend and ad tracking. And so we don't understand what's going on here. We have what's going on. And they came to us. And so we have security researchers. We looked into it and we discovered that someone in this country had downloaded the application onto their machine, decompiled the app, so broke it back down into code, found, oh, this is where the ad display or
Wow.
microtransactions or whatever they're using to monetize the app, this is it going to the parent company. Well, let's
Yeah.
replace that with my own personal ad display or monetization key.
That's amazing.
Or whatever. Yeah, PayPal API key or whatever they did, right? So they basically redirected all of the transaction, all of the revenue from the app to themselves, rebundled the app back, gave it basically used maybe some UTF-8 or Unicode kind of trick to make the name of the app still look like the original app, and then re-released that back into the store, re-signed it and redeployed it back into the store. And so from a user perspective, oh, I want to play my game or whatever. Cool. Like, that's the game. I'm going to download it. And as far as they're concerned, it's the game. Like, no one's cheating in the game. And that from our customer's perspective, they're paying for the infrastructure. They're paying for the development, right? They're sponsoring basically this application. Meanwhile, all the actual revenue is going out the back door into someone else's pocket. And so that was something that they weren't even aware of. And the reason why that happened is because I think this customer, in fact, I know this customer, their expectation was like, oh, Apple's protecting us or Google is protecting us. They're scanning the store, they're doing all this stuff. And the reality is those companies aren't super concerned about that type of security.
Right.
They can't be scanning apps, and scans of apps don't even really betray anything, right? In this instance, a scan of the app doesn't tell you anything.
How would you even
wrong,
catch that?
right?
That has changed,
So, I mean, so security research is a huge part of what we do. And so the data points we have around emerging threats, what's happening in the dark web, what's happening with malicious actors, what's happening with nation state actors that are looking to compromise data across the globe. That's a big part of what we do. So for us, we can kind of say, okay, this app in this country, these are our 2 clues. And so we can say, okay, let's go and look at, and then we can see, okay, well, there's 2 apps that have the same name, but they don't have the same name, or they, you know, one's from a different publisher. So that's where we can go in and then decipher that. And then we take the app and we decompile this foreign fraudulent app, and we say, let's do a delta or a diff on what our customer is producing and what this other app is producing. And then we can say, this is what happened. And we show it to them and they say, we didn't even know that was possible. We didn't even think to look in the app store for a fraudulent app, right? Because again, their assumption is like, oh, Apple's got it, right? Oh, Apple put out a new privacy library or changed the standard on data collection, so that protects us. And that is just a false sense of security that I think a lot of organizations aren't really aware of. And so that's why we're targeting people like, hey, if you have transactions that are flowing through your app that are valuable to you, they're valuable to someone else as well. And that's where it's worth at least doing a security assessment, which Appdome, we offer that as well. To, you know, if you're coming from a position of we don't even know where to begin, but we need to do something, then we can say, okay, let us, step in and evaluate kind of where you're at and what threats and risks are there. And then we can, expose all of that and say, okay, here's what we found. And then conversely, here's all the protections we would recommend adding to diffuse all of that.
It makes you think, if they had been just a little less greedy, don't take 100%, take 10%, take 5%. They could have run for years.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, are there others out there that are smarter that are actually doing that already?
It's interesting, so ChatGPT, right? This year, ChatGPT just exploded.
Oh, what's that? I hadn't heard of it.
So
yeah, tell us.
That's an AI tool. Maybe you should, check it out. But the first few mobile apps. So OpenAI did not release a ChatGPT mobile app for a few months, right? They had the web interface and the API. There was no mobile app. So the first couple of apps that were ChatGPT apps were malware. So they did have access to the OpenAI. You still got ChatGPT, but you had an app that's logging everything you're typing to ChatGPT and sending that to some third-party system that who knows what that is, right? And so that's something we've seen, is that oftentimes first movers on something are malicious actors because they're trying to capture, early adopters or people who don't know, or an immature market or an undefined user space or things like that. It's somebody's job. It's many people's job who are working, overtime to basically undermine these types of platforms and these types of experiences. So that was a common thing we found as well, where we started identifying, hey, this isn't ChatGPT. This is ChatGPT with malware baked in that's key logging everything you enter in. So consider, the security, privacy implications of that.
So as you were saying that, I remembered that I did download a ChatGPT-like application. It has a logo, but it's called something else. It's called ChatSmith, and I'm going to my phone and deleting it right now.
When you delete an app,
not a bad idea.
I ever used it, but I don't want to take the chance.
Yeah.
So when you delete an app, does it leave stuff in the phone that might be malicious, or does it really delete it?
I believe it does delete it. Now, you can have very sophisticated malware, especially things that may be side-loaded in, that don't leverage the APIs in the right way, right? And so now the good thing about Appdome is that we're looking at processes that are running in real time. So maybe you do have some malware on the device, but if it's not running, so for example, screen share, screen recording, or key logging malware. So, the artifacts of that malware may still be on the device. What we're looking for is that process running. And so that may be the thing where the process runs in the background forever, right? And so that may be something that we can bubble that up and say, hey, this is taking place, or we've detected this evidence here. And then there may be instances where the malware is there, but it's not running. And so, again, we're not detecting that. We're not scanning the entire file system. Right. And, that's kind of a privacy violation of our users. But we are looking at saying, hey, in the runtime environment, what's going on here? What are the peer processes that are running that we need to potentially protect against, or at least alert the user that we don't consider this to be trustworthy?
Kurt, can I send you my phone to do a security scan on it?
I may not be the right guy, but I can get it to probably the person who can. I don't know how long it'll take, though. You may be grounded for a couple
Yeah.
weeks. I know being stuck without
Yeah,
your
you can't
phone
can't
is
be without
tough.
a phone for weeks. But that might be a cool service actually, is maybe downloading something from Appdome where you do a full
Hmm.
security scan of the phone. Because exactly, you just talked about, you spent a few minutes talking, and I was like, oh crap, I did that. Um, and who knows what else I did unsuspectingly, and millions of people around the world that maybe they have something on their phone now that they're not aware of, and a security scan could be very
Yeah.
valuable.
Yeah, so we offer the assessment to our client customers, to our business customers, and say, what is your app at risk of, right? And the net effect of this is you're protecting users, because if you're a bank and you say, "Hey, I'm going to have malware detection in my app," and if somebody says, "Okay, great," and if you load that up and you say, "Hey, I'm seeing a message that's telling me I have malware on my phone now," I didn't even know that was a thing. And so there has been instances where, somebody's coming back and saying, "There's no malware on my device. There's no," and we can look down and say, what we're seeing this process. Oh, that was a thing I sideloaded that, from a link I got on a website that's, giving me, it's a decorate, it's just like a fancy UI tweak, or it's a custom keyboard or something like that. So people, I think, innocently enough, we customize our phones. We put whatever apps on your phones. I mean, we spend hundreds of hours on our phone, probably too much time on our phones. And so that's the thing, is that ends up accumulating a lot of stuff. Um, and so if your app is the one that's saying, down to your customers saying, "Hey, this isn't safe, what you're doing," that person is going to be like, "Wow, like, I didn't even know that was the case." Like, and so it's going to create, the idea is here is it creates more trust for your users, where yes, they may be inconvenienced by saying, "Well, my banking app doesn't start up anymore." But then the flip side is that, well, your bank account isn't going to be cleared out by the person who's recording your screen. So let's consider it in that regard, right? And if you've had your identity stolen, or if you've been the victim of fraud, it's incredibly frustrating, and especially if you're dealing with a big enterprise who's trying to figure out what's going on, or who to believe, or are you the person you say you are? What this does is it heads that whole experience off. It diffuses that whole process of being someone who's been defrauded. And so, if you felt that pain and you see, and at a later date, you see somebody who's actively trying to protect you, it lets you realize, like, okay, wow, these guys, they have my best interest in mind, and ensuring that I have a good, safe, and positive experience, as one of their customers, as a user of their application.
So along those lines, I remember hearing someone at Appdome, it might have just been a conversation you and I had around specific things to be wary of. And I remember I'm a big advocate for accessibility in software, but I know that accessibility turns out to be a large vector for threat detection. So can you tell us real quick how to make sure that we are able to give people the assistive technology they need without actually introducing malware into their phone?
Yeah. So it's definitely going to be a matter of, where are you getting your apps from, or what apps are you using? If you're an end user, being a little bit defensive about, what you want to install. You know, um to your point, yeah, accessibility malware, as it's like I was saying, the first movers are oftentimes the malicious actors, right? Android accessibility framework is fairly new, and we're already seeing very sophisticated, highly targeted malware, that uses this. So it's things that are very narrow band. So if you're in a certain country and you're a customer of a certain bank, there is malware that will leverage the accessibility framework, um, to basically penetrate your account in that specific bank in this specific country. So it's narrow band, but very effective if it hits that sweet spot. I mean, it's a bullseye in terms of compromising somebody's device if they're doing that. So, at the end user level, it's a matter of being very picky about what you download. Um, Considering, again, do I need this cool custom swipe keyboard that's got, 5 downloads that just got released yesterday? That is it really going to make your life any better? I think there's also, the idea of, if you're an end user, asking your bank, like, how are you securing this application? Or what are you guys doing that's in here? That's sometimes you can't always affect change in that way, but at least you're letting them know you're creating as an end user, you're putting that pressure on the entities to say, hey, we need to be protected as well. If you're the app provider, then that's going to be something of leveraging at the development level, leveraging those APIs correctly and responsibly so that you are providing accessibility, considerations for your users who need that. And then it's implemented in a way that conforms to those standards. And so there can even be a way where you're inadvertently exposing data, or you're inadvertently leaking data or leaving data stored somewhere because you're not leveraging those APIs in the correct way, or maybe you're shortcutting some of the proper best practices. And so, there's definitely two sides. Number one, being an intelligent and assertive user who's aware of what's potentially the risks and threats are out there. And then also as a provider who's saying, hey, maybe this is something we want to ensure that, again, the things that are valuable in our app, which is our customers' data by and large, we want to make sure that if there's any potential for that to be exposed, we have the right defenses in place. So that's not even a risk from us.
That is gold. Really, really great. Great information. I have a feeling a lot of people don't know about that vector.
Yeah.
So only a couple minutes left. I want to ask two more questions.
Sure.
One is, I'm wondering, is there a risk, or what have you seen in terms of Appdome making developers think, oh, got the toy, I don't need to do security coding anymore? Where do you fall on that?
Yeah. So two things. So number one, code obfuscation is a bit, as a developer, my background is in software development. And so, you see code obfuscation, which is built into a lot of tools, which basically kind of just scrambles and makes your code, when someone does decompile your application, it makes your code that much harder to interpret. But it's hard. It's like a puzzle. So people like this, other, people are like, oh, well, challenge accepted. Now, if you've scrambled the code, I'm going to unscramble it and defuse that. So that's one thing. And then code scans as well. We see that. And I totally recognize and understand the need for code scanning. The problem with code scanning is that it only scans the code you've written. And so for things like malware detection, if you're focusing on, hey, I want my app to run fast and look good and have a good user experience and offer these features and capabilities, if you don't have code that's detecting malware, then code scanning isn't going to help you, right? That needs to be something that is proactively part of the application to say, is the runtime environment safe? Is it trustworthy? Is it at a level that I feel, this is acceptable to run this application in? So those are the two things, they're at the code level, but it's really, the idea here is that if you're an app developer, if you're a feature developer, then typically security isn't going to be your forte. It's not going to be your specialty. And especially as, the APIs themselves are changing, there's always a new version of iOS. There's always a new version of Android. There's always a new version of Kotlin, or there's whatever your tool you're using, or whatever platform you're deploying to, there's always something to stay current with, just to deliver the features, just to build the thing, right? You're having to stay kind of current with all this stuff. Protecting it is moving even potentially faster because there's way more people working against you to break your app than there are going to be people working with you to help you deliver a fast app or a well-featured app. And so that's the thing where as a developer, building that competency of, oh, I'm going to get good at defensive, this type of security research or this type of security programming is like, that's a specialty in and of itself, right? So trying to be the person who can do both is really just a losing battle. And the rate of change that's happening, it's tough enough just keeping pace with the features, trying to keep pace with the security concerns. That is really something that is potentially an overwhelming task. Especially if you're talking about, well, double the work because there's iOS and Android, right? So that's another thing to consider. And I think for developers, if you are concerned about the security protections that are in play, then I think it's a matter of, okay, where is the value? Thinking about, okay, what risk am I the most concerned about? It may not matter if somebody runs your app on a rooted device, based on your use case, based on your customer profile, but it may matter that the traffic is secure, that nothing gets intercepted in between, right? So that's going to be something, that man in the middle detection, that malicious proxy detection, that false VPN protection, that's going to be something that requires a significant amount of research and then proactive development, right? That ends up becoming a whole feature set in and of itself. And so that's where, your backlog starts to multiply. If you're going to say, oh, well, we need to build security in, that ends up creating a whole other level of effort for delivering that.
That makes a ton of sense. I hope that, people can go to the website as appdome.com or
Appdome.com.
All right, cool. Nikolai, any more questions?
Just one question that really stands out to me, and I'm curious, do you find that one operating system, like maybe Android versus iOS, is more prone to threats over another? Because just you talking about your house analogy, I was just thinking about Android and how many different devices and versions there are, and how many possible windows and garages there are on your house as a result. Does that make it more susceptible to malicious threats?
It does. So, and it's kind of sometimes the blessing and the curse of open source, is that anybody can kind of get in there and do different things. Android is sometimes a little bit more Wild West when it comes to things, especially with the ability to sideload applications. So to circumvent the App Store, that's a concern as well. But at the same time, there's rumors that iOS is going to allow sideloading of applications. And so that's another thing where I guess there's a use case and a need there, but that opens up another threat vector. So big picture is, yes, Android is a little bit more of a vector. Also, price point, is a big thing. People buying an iPhone versus, you can get a $10 pretty cheaply made phone that may actually have malware or malicious components built in. And so those are things we can say, don't allow people that are using this device to run the app, because we don't trust this device manufacturer, or we don't trust this particular device, as a model. So that's something where, again, we are concerned about what people are doing and offering the greatest protection, because we can protect users. We also need to protect ourselves, as the business itself. And so that's, again, developing that holistic approach, exactly as you're saying, is identifying where the greatest risk is and then responding appropriately. That's what's going to give you the best protection, not just necessarily a super heavy-handed blanket approach to locking down everything and locking everyone out, at the first sign of trouble.
Right. Cool. Well, I know we could sit here and talk for 4 more hours. We've done it in the past. But I think that's all the time we got. Kurt, I want to thank you for joining us today. This was gold, super, super dense amount of information packed into a short amount of time. So I think everyone probably learned something from it. Thank you for being here, and happy to have you, Nikolai. And until next time, I think we'll sign off and say aloha from Test Case Scenario.
Thank you for joining us on Test Case Scenario. Share your thoughts in the comments. We'll make sure to respond to each and every single one. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell to keep in touch. If you missed our last episode, it's popping up on your screen right now. Go, click it. Until next time on Test Case Scenario.